It was almost midnight when Daniel Brooks, a 52-year-old janitor working the night shift at a luxury business tower, finished cleaning the main entrance. The building belonged to one of the most powerful companies in the city, and every night Daniel watched expensive cars arrive, wealthy businessmen walk through the glass doors, and executives leave with assistants carrying their briefcases. Daniel himself lived in a tiny, rented apartment on the other side of the city and worked 2 jobs just to support his elderly mother and his young daughter. He never complained about his life. He believed that a person's value was not measured by the clothes they wore or the money they had in their bank account. That night, while Daniel was carrying a trash bag toward the service entrance, he noticed an old man sitting beside the building. The man looked exhausted. His gray hair was messy, his beard was untrimmed, and his old coat was covered with dust. He was holding an empty food container in his hands and staring at the ground. Hundreds of people had passed him that evening, but nobody had stopped. Daniel looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at the clock. His shift was almost over. He could have walked away. Instead, he put the trash bag down. "Sir, have you eaten anything tonight?" The old man slowly raised his head. His eyes were tired but unusually calm. "No," he answered quietly. Daniel opened his lunch bag. Inside was the dinner he had packed for himself. It wasn't much, some bread, rice, and chicken, but he placed the entire container into the old man's hands. "Take it." The old man stared at the food. "You're giving me your dinner?" Daniel smiled slightly. "I can eat something when I get home. You look like you need it more than I do." The old man lowered his eyes. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he asked, "Why are you helping me?" Daniel shrugged. "Because you're hungry." The answer was so simple that the old man almost smiled. His name was Richard. At least that was the name he gave Daniel. For the next several nights, Daniel continued seeing Richard outside the building. Every time, Daniel brought him something to eat. Sometimes it was a sandwich, sometimes coffee. Once during heavy rain, Daniel secretly brought him an old jacket and told him to keep it. But Daniel didn't know that Richard was not actually homeless. He was Richard Anderson, one of the richest businessmen in the country, and the building where Daniel worked belonged to him. Richard had deliberately disguised himself and spent several weeks visiting places connected to his company. He wanted to discover how ordinary workers were treated when nobody knew who he was. What he discovered had shocked him. Executives ignored homeless people. Security guards chased them away. Employees walked past them without even looking. But one man stopped every night, a janitor. Richard began secretly watching Daniel. He noticed that Daniel treated everyone the same way. He held doors open for delivery workers. He helped elderly visitors carry their bags. He cleaned the lobby long after everyone had gone home. And whenever he saw someone struggling, he tried to help even though he himself had very little. One evening, Richard deliberately dropped a small envelope near the entrance. Inside were several $1,000s. He wanted to see what Daniel would do. Daniel found it while cleaning. He looked around. Then he immediately took the envelope to security. "I found this near the entrance. Someone must have lost it." Richard watched from across the street. For the first time in years, the billionaire felt ashamed of the way he had judged people. But Richard wasn't finished testing Daniel. The following morning, he made one phone call. "Bring me Daniel Brooks's employment records." A few hours later, Richard discovered something that changed everything. Daniel's daughter needed an expensive operation. Daniel had been working 2 jobs because he couldn't afford the medical bills, and yet he had given his dinner to a stranger. Richard stared at Daniel's file for a long time. Then he whispered, "I need to know what kind of man would sacrifice his own family's comfort for someone he doesn't even know." The next night, Richard returned to the same place. But this time, something unexpected happened. Daniel wasn't there, and Richard suddenly realized that he had begun waiting for the one person who had treated him like a human being. The following evening, Daniel finally returned to work. Richard was sitting outside the building again, still wearing his old clothes and pretending to be homeless. But this time, Daniel immediately noticed something different. Richard looked weak. Daniel rushed toward him. "Are you okay?" Richard nodded. "I think so." Daniel touched his shoulder. "You can't keep sitting outside in this cold. Come inside." Richard looked toward the enormous glass doors. "They won't let someone like me inside." Daniel looked at him seriously. They might not let you in because of your clothes, but I'm letting you in because you're a person. Daniel opened the service entrance and quietly took Richard into the staff room. He gave him water, found him a clean shirt, and called the building's security office to ask whether there was somewhere warm where Richard could stay until morning. Richard watched everything in silence. Finally, he asked Daniel, "Why do you keep helping me?" Daniel smiled. "My mother always told me that you never know when. You'll be the person who needs help." Richard lowered his head. Those words hit him harder than anything anyone had said to him in years. The next morning, Daniel was called to the executive boardroom. He had no idea why. When he entered, he saw the company's senior executives standing around a long conference table. At the end of the room stood a tall man in an expensive black suit. Daniel recognized him immediately. It was Richard, but the old clothes were gone. His gray hair was neatly styled. His suit was worth more than Daniel's annual salary. Several executives stood beside him with nervous expressions. Daniel froze. Richard looked at him. "Do you recognize me?" Daniel stared at him in disbelief. "You're Richard?" Richard smiled. "Yes." One of the executives stepped forward. "Mr. Anderson is the owner and founder of this entire company." Daniel's eyes widened. The homeless man he had been feeding for weeks was actually a billionaire. Richard walked toward Daniel. "I disguised myself because I wanted to know how people treated someone they believed had nothing." He looked around the room. "And I learned something." Everyone became silent. Richard pointed toward Daniel. "This man treated me better than almost everyone in this building." Daniel didn't know what to say. Richard continued. "He gave me his own dinner when he was struggling to feed his family. He gave me his jacket during the rain. He returned money that wasn't his. And he never once asked who I was." Then Richard placed a folder on the table. Inside were documents concerning Daniel's daughter's medical treatment. Daniel immediately became emotional. "What is this?" Richard answered quietly. "Her treatment has already been paid for." Daniel stared at him. "You don't have to do that." "I know." Richard smiled. "That's why I want to." Daniel's eyes filled with tears, but he tried to control his emotions. Richard then made an announcement that shocked everyone in the room. "Starting today, Daniel Brooks is no longer a janitor." The executives looked at one another. Richard continued, "He will become the Director of Employee Welfare and Community Programs." Daniel shook his head. "I don't have the qualifications for that." Richard smiled. "You have something more important." He paused. "Character." Daniel looked at the billionaire standing in front of him. Richard extended his hand. "You helped a homeless man when you thought nobody important was watching." Daniel shook his hand. Richard leaned closer and said, "Now I want everyone in this company to learn from the man who helped me when they didn't even see me." Months later, Daniel's daughter received the treatment she desperately needed. Daniel continued working, but his life had completely changed. He never forgot the night he saw an old homeless man sitting outside a building and decided to share his dinner. And Richard never forgot the lesson either, because that night, the billionaire had gone outside looking for people who valued money. Instead, he found one janitor who valued humanity. And sometimes, the person everyone walks past is the very person capable of changing your entire life.